Where the hell have you been?
Aboard the shuttle Galileo, returning from a diplomatic mission trying to bring two warring worlds to peace, Kirk, Spock, and Bones are escorting Federation Commissioner Nancy Hedford back to the Enterprise for medical treatment. Ellie from the Andy Griffith Show here has contracted a rare and deadly illness, and the three men are annoyed that she's being a whiner. Yeah, Starfleet failed to immunize her against fatal illnesses, and now she's dying due to medical negligence. And they think she's being a bitch about it. Fuck off. Suddenly, the shuttle is accosted by a mysterious space anomaly, which disables their systems and drags them to the surface of a small planet. They are greeted by a human man who introduces himself as Cochrane, and Kirk and Bones thinks he looks familiar. Cochrane tells them that, try as they might, the Enterprisers won't be able to get the Galileo off the ground, as the planet emits a dampening field that affects all power systems. Outside Cochrane's house, the Triumvirate spots the same entity that brought their shuttle to the planet. They demand answers, and Cochrane explains that the entity is sentient. He calls it the Companion, and like them, it brought him here. It turns out that Cochrane's full name is Zephram Cochrane, which the Triumvirate immediately recognizes. Zephram Cochrane was the first human to build a working warp engine, which also led to first contact with Earth's alien neighbors, the Vulcans. The gang is shocked, as Cochrane died 150 years ago. Imagine if humans from today shipwrecked on an island and met Carl Benz. Cochrane explains that he was an old, dying man when the Companion found his ship in space. It not only revived him, but aged him back to a young man, which explains why he looks nothing like James Cromwell.
Let's bring what I like to call the Warp Core online.
The Companion also provides for Cochrane's basic needs and keeps him immortal. Cochrane theorizes that the Companion brought the shuttle crew down to give Cochrane something it can't offer: human company. Cochrane wants desperately to leave, but the Companion won't let him or the shuttle crew go. Hedford's symptoms are getting worse, and Bones warns that if they don't rendezvous with the Enterprise within several hours, she will die. Kirk and Spock think up a way to disable the Companion, which fails. The Companion doesn't take it well. Since that didn't work, the Enterprisers try to talk to it. Spock reconfigures the shuttle's universal translator, and Kirk tries to appeal to it.
They realize the Companion is in love with Cochrane, to which Cochrane responds with disgust.
For all these years, I've let something as alien as that crawl around inside me, into my mind, my feelings. That thing fed on me, used me. It's disgusting.
Wait till he finds out that Vulcans kiss with their hands. Kirk impresses upon the Companion that it, or I guess she, and Cochrane can't really be together the way they are. This inspires the Companion to inhabit the dying body of Commissioner Hedford, reviving her like the Companion did for Cochrane. The Companion believes that if she is human, then Cochrane will want to stay with her. Well, now that she's not a gross space cloud, Cochrane's all into that. He decides he wants to stay with her now, and the Triumvirate leaves them to it. I guess someone else will have to stop that war. In doing this review, I've discovered that episodes I dismissed before I actually liked better on rewatch. Metamorphosis is unfortunately a case of the opposite. There's something sweet about seeing two, or technically three, lonely people find each other, and Kirk's pretty words about love suckered me in, but I find a lot of the episode to be rather slow-moving and tedious. I find I'm here more for the set dressing than anything else. Cochrane's house is dope as f***, and the score by George Dooning is lovely, but the episode is unfortunately less than the sum of its parts. Usually I hand-wave away outdated mindsets that pop up in the original series because even though Star Trek is set in the future, it is still very much a product of its time. But since the whole the Companion is female-coded and therefore must be in love with Cochrane thing is the entire crux of the story, I can't really dismiss it this time. Speaking as a borderline millennial/Gen Z, what with our pronouns and oat milk lattes, I just find the whole thing silly. The Companion doesn't understand the human concept of gender identity as defined by 20th century Western civilization. It's a vaporous form of energy. Why would you assume it's a girl?
The idea of male and female are universal constants.
But what about the people who identify as attack helicopter? I'm non-binary, I can make that joke. That's a small quibble, though. The real issue I take with this episode is the mixed metaphor. I have seen people claim that this episode is an allegory for being in a same-sex relationship, or even for being trans. And if that's how the episode speaks to you personally, your interpretation is totally valid. Although I will say this, white gays, we need to have a sidebar real quick. Not everything is about us. Given the year this was written and the political climate in the United States during that period of history, this episode is clearly a metaphor for miscegenation, right? Bear in mind as I say all of this, I am a milk person, so I'm really sorry if I overstep here. The first laws criminalizing relationships between whites and people of color in the colonies were enacted during the 17th century. These laws continued to stay in place through the 17 and 1800s and into the 20th century. Between 1913 and 1948, 30 out of the then 48 states enforced anti-miscegenation laws. The Supreme Court case of Pace v. Alabama in 1883 affirmed anti-miscegenation in the United States. The plaintiff, black man Tony Pace, and his white lover Mary Cox challenged the state of Alabama over their arrest. Pace claimed that the act under which he was convicted violated his 14th Amendment rights. But the court decided that since Pace and Cox had been punished equally, a sentence of 2 years imprisonment in the state penitentiary each, neither of them had been discriminated against and their case held no water. In 1948, however, the case of Perez v. Sharp found California's anti-miscegenation laws unconstitutional, which set off a chain reaction. By 1867, 14 states had overturned their miscegenation laws. Then came the civil rights movement of the 1960s, during which time the Civil Rights Act of 1964 was passed. This act prohibited unequal application of voter registration movements, racial segregation in schools and public accommodations, and employment discrimination. Many hard-earned victories were won by the passing of that bill, but there was still one domino that stubbornly refused to fall. Until 1967, the year that the Supreme Court ruled on the landmark case of Loving v. Virginia. 3 years prior, the Supreme Court saw the case of McLaughlin v. Florida, which ultimately decriminalized cohabitation between interracial couples. But Loving v. Virginia was the final nail in anti-miscegenation's coffin. In 1967, interracial couple Richard and Mildred Loving, ironic name, challenged the constitutionality of Virginia's anti-miscegenation laws. The couple had moved to Washington, D.C., where their union was legal, but were arrested when they returned to Virginia. Their sentence was suspended on the condition that the Lovings stay out of Virginia for 25 years. They decided to appeal. The Lovings eventually presented their case before the highest court in the nation, and finally, on June 12, 1967, the Supreme Court of the United States ruled unanimously that anti-miscegenation laws were unconstitutional. Chief Justice Earl Warren wrote that under the Constitution, the freedom to marry a person of another race resides with the individual and cannot be infringed by the state. 5 months later, Metamorphosis premiered on NBC. I say that Metamorphosis is a metaphor for interracial marriage, but it is not a good one. I understand that in 1967 there were certain standards and practices that the NBC had to abide by, and that Star Trek was already pushing the envelope as it was. Nevertheless, the metaphor loses its impact by having the companion turn into a palatable white lady. It would have been so much more effective if they had cast a person of color instead. Unfortunately, American television was still operating under the Hays Code, which prohibited depictions of interracial relationships, so I get why they had to cast the companion as a white lady. However, the problem doesn't just lie in the casting, it's in the writing as well. Cochrane is initially disgusted with the companion's love for him.
Is this what the future holds? Men who have no notion of decency or morality?
I'm sure some Americans in the 1950s and 60s said similar things in response to the idea of interracial marriage. Ah yes, my favorite romance trope. The bigot who falls in love with the target of his prejudice. Yuck.
But you can't really love him. You are two different things.
If I were human, there can be love.
So by the episode's logic, the companion can't be with Cochrane because she's not human. So, she becomes human. Let's not even take into consideration the whole consent issue of walking around in another person's skin to pursue a romantic relationship. Otherwise, I'd be a hypocrite. If this is a metaphor for interracial relationships, what is the episode saying then? That Cochrane and the companion have to be the same race to be together? At least when they did it in Shrek, they managed to make it about seeing the beauty within.
I'm supposed to be beautiful.
But you are beautiful.
Also, Shrek has donkey and dragon, interspecies marriage goals. But somehow, Metamorphosis managed to boomerang its internal message so badly that it actually ended up being anti-race mixing. I think Gene Coon probably had good intentions when writing this. He probably just wanted to write Beauty and the Beast in space and didn't think about the social implications his story would end up having. I think it wouldn't have been so loaded if Cochrane had been normal about it and not acted like the companion loving him was a perversion of the natural order, but having him recoil in revulsion out of being that's treated him with kindness and care for 150 years, albeit under wrongful imprisonment, only to have him do a complete 180 when said being becomes a conventionally attractive white lady is not a good look. But it's over now. And luckily in the next episode, we'll see a human-alien couple that actually rocks. Oh, and Happy New Year.